Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning to those on the West Coast. Janet and Andira have asked me to repeat the welcome speech for those who may be just waking up and joining us in different parts of the world or on the West Coast. So I apologize. Pardon me. I apologize if you've already heard this. And just so everyone knows, I'm Shane Fox. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Link3D. And I want to kick off this afternoon or this morning, wherever you are, just by letting everyone know that the Link3D team has all of you and your families in our thoughts and our prayers. So during the time of global angst and hardship and so many unknowns, everyone at Link3D, our entire staff wanted to step up and take responsibility to ensure solidarity amongst our community. So at Link3D, we set one goal, and that goal was to host this conference that we hope will enable our community to provide hope and inspiration to all of you today. We've been humbled. Personally, I've been humbled. I know everyone at Link3D has by the outpour of support and well wishes and camaraderie around hosting this conference. It's also been personally inspirational to see how this community has come together to showcase its agility and its engineering thought leadership to produce some of these life-saving devices that the world needs today. So one thing is, you'll notice there is a room dedicated to COVID-19. So if anyone wants to join and talk and share resources or ideas, please just feel free to hop into that room and take it from there. We have an incredible lineup for the second half of the day and tomorrow as well. Personally, I mentioned this morning, I've been in the industry for a dozen years, and the people that currently are speaking or have spoke are folks that I've admired and I've learned from throughout my professional career, and I'm so excited that they're participating and sharing all of this knowledge with us. Again, I just want to thank our presenters thus far. I want to personally thank Andira and Janet. They put this together in about 7 or 8 days. We've had, on average, almost 250 to 300 folks live here, and then about probably another 200 or so watching from YouTube. I think everyone here has really showcased to the world and to our industry that additive is not slowing down, and we're continuing to move forward. And I'm really proud to be a part of this industry. This is such an incredible pull-off we've all done. So make sure you like it, you share about it, you tell everyone about it. I want to make additive trending in the news, and I want people to see how we all came together as an industry to move forward. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Andira. I hope everyone stays safe and you enjoy the rest of the program today.
Hello, everyone. We are now about to start our next session. It is going to be a fireside chat on change management for additive manufacturing. Today, we have two of the authors of the textbook called Additive Manufacturing Change Management: Best Practices to Help Executive Management at Companies Navigate How to Utilize AM within Their Own Company. We have with us David Dietrich, the Engineering Fellow for Additive Manufacturing Design at Honeywell Aerospace. And we also have with us Beth Cudney, Associate Professor at Missouri S&T. Within their textbook, they present the impact of AM technology, engaging war stories, describing the significant hurdles in AM certification and implementation, provide a template of proven change management best practices to help businesses develop an executable plan to then enable their additive manufacturing initiatives. We will also be joined by our very own Janet Carr, Chief Marketing Officer, during this fireside chat to discuss the contents within the textbook and help you better understand how you can develop a successful plan to bring your AM to business. You can also find their book on Amazon by Kindle, hardcover, or paperback. right. We'll hand it over now to Janet.
Just a second as I'm pulling everything together. Hello, David. Thanks for joining us.
No problem.
Right now, we'll also have Beth join us. Perfect.
Hi, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you, everyone, for joining this conference today. For those who don't know, David Dietrich is from Honeywell. He's an engineering fellow. I've been following his work for some time now, so I'm really excited that we're here today. And there's also Beth Cudney joining us. Beth, do you mind turning on your camera so that we can all see you as part of this conference?
Will do.
Wonderful, wonderful. Perfect. So we'll just wait for that. So before we get started, would love to start with, what inspired you guys to write the Additive Manufacturing Change Management Best Practices 160-page textbook? I'd love to get your point of view on that. And for those who have never read this book, I will post this in the general chat so you can get a copy of it for yourself from Amazon.
Well, first of all, can you hear me okay?
Wonderful.
Okay, perfect. Well, first of all, let me start off by saying just some well wishes to everyone who's stuck at home for the coronavirus, and just everyone, please be safe and abide by your local government officials and state officials and their recommendations. So, and thanks for this opportunity, Janet, for doing this. You may notice that I see some of the comments actually talking about the fireplace because I live in Arizona and I use this about 1% of the time. So now is the actual time that I can actually use it to be beneficial as a fireside chat. So I'm super excited about that. But to get back to your question, what inspired us to write this book is really more of there's an element within industry that really sort of prohibits additive manufacturing growth and opportunities. And a lot of it is technical, as we all know. We've gone through a number of different technical conferences and technical learnings. And there's technical challenges, obviously, with this growth, but a large part of it is actual cultural, right? We have cultural barriers that exist within companies. And so the co-authors, Beth and Mike Kenworthy, who, by the way, couldn't be on today's call, but expresses his gratitude and wishes he could, we all sort of got together and said, hey, there's a lot of technical barriers, but really there's more cultural barriers around sort of the adoption of AM within companies. And Mike and myself and Beth had experienced these over a number of years working at different companies in the aerospace industry. And so we wanted to highlight those and kind of give example what we've experienced in the past, hoping that in the future, if some people read about our examples, maybe they can avoid those. So if we can help just one person sort of understand how to avoid common pitfalls that we've seen in industry through adoption of AM, then we feel like we've done our job. So that was sort of the inspiration for the book.
Wonderful. And how about you, Beth? What got you interested in also launching, I guess, a couple years work into developing this textbook with Michael Kentworthy and David?
Well, David and I go back quite a few years, and I was really just interested in his work, and a lot of my work has been more in the change management side from an industry perspective. And so, we'd actually worked on a book together before this on lean, and any opportunity to work with Dave is always a welcome opportunity. And it's such a growing area. I come from more of a manufacturing background in automotive and aerospace, and so seeing what Dave was working through in terms of the additive manufacturing area was very intriguing for me.
Fascinating. So if we're able today, what success will look like is if someone can take away a lesson learned from both of your experiences, so they can bring back to their organization and hopefully overcome some of the pitfalls that you guys have seen and experienced. Is that right? Great. So just a quick question for you. Okay. So just going back to like the first chapter in your book, you guys have mentioned that a lot of organizations, there's a lack of understanding of additive manufacturing deployment in companies. And many leaders are making incorrect theoretical cost savings for additive manufacturing, especially to existing product lines. And I think you put out a stat there that said only 34% of US-based manufacturing executives have implemented an AM strategy today, but many of them are one-dimensional, strategically flawed, or too limited in organizational scope. So as leaders in AM, what do leaders need to do in order for them to develop the right understanding on how to build the right business cases, ensure successful deployment strategies? What kind of team do they need to put together so they get the right support from large enterprises to startups?
So in that regard, yeah, I think that statistic for the book came from one of the surveys out there at the time when we were writing this. A lot of it has to do with sort of how leaders have approached additive manufacturing technology, and the fact that they did very similar to a traditional manufacturing technology in terms of, okay, we want to see the business case for this technology. Let's look at this part. Let's build it additively, and then let's look at what it costs, and then compare that conventionally to something else. That in itself is inherently flawed because of what the technology can do and the design capability that you can get out of the technology. You're really sort of sub-optimizing in that case. So that's sort of been the approach, and we've seen a lot of companies start with that, and I'm sure many of the people watching this have seen that as well, where you've seen a company sort of take an existing part and then price it out for AM and say, oh, AM's too expensive. And no fault of the leadership on taking that approach. That's been the same approach that has been used for decades and decades and decades in the manufacturing industry. However, one of the things that makes AM different is the ability to do part integration and to take that next level of system optimization in the design. So the strategy is, like I said, has been sort of flawed in the fact that they try to use these one-for-one business cases. They often don't work out, and then their conclusion is, oh, AM's too expensive. And then they sort of move on. But if you simply sort of take a step back and look at not individual line items on an Excel file for part numbers, but rather look up higher level in that assembly to subsystems and even systems themselves, and then start looking at integration of those components together, you'll find that you get a much better business case. And in some cases, you actually do that design integration and you can't really build it any other way. So AM will win the business case no matter what. So that's sort of been the wrong approach. Now, overcome that, I think, was the second part of your question, by forming teams, gathering sort of intelligence on how to do this the correct way takes an integrated team. It's not just the design engineer, it's not just the manufacturing engineer. It's largely a group of people, quality engineering, structural engineering, everyone that you would typically see siloed in these very large companies. They sort of all need to kind of blend together into an integrated team and look at different perspectives on how best to optimize a system, and then come up with that sort of system as a solution to, business case, by creating a whole new product or a whole new product line, perhaps. So a lot of it has to do with breaking down those silos, which we talk about a lot in the book, and sort of coming together in a more integrated fashion, because AM forces people to work together more than in the past, where you've just had the manufacturing department, the design engineering department tosses it over the wall to the manufacturing department, who tosses it over the wall to the supplier, and that's not the way that that's not the way to do it with this technology. So by having an integrated team, that's a huge step.
But having integrated team is one thing, but when you're starting off with additive manufacturing, how do you even think about forming a team? How do you even think about developing the right strategy to introduce additive manufacturing? And in your book, you mentioned that there is this framework called the Saunders Renishaw maturity model. And I have it right here, so I'm going to pull it up. And you guys have mentioned that every organization should move from the rapid prototyping, direct part replacement, part consolidation, DFAM, and then finally what you call the Nirvana AM stage. I was wondering if Beth or David, can you share more about how an organization transitions from adopting or has adopted or is starting to scale their additive infrastructure as it relates to getting to AM Nirvana?
Right, yeah, so just sort of walking up through the block diagram that you have on the screen, if you could go back to that.
It's a GIF, so it's going to rotate.
Oh, it's going to get, okay, right. So at the bottom is the rapid prototyping, right? And many companies use rapid prototyping in general. And again, I'm not taking credit for this. Saunders from Renishaw, who came up with this and sort of built upon it a little bit. A lot of companies start kind of in their maturity level at the bottom of just using the technology for rapid prototyping in general. And then they move up to, like I said, sort of a business case, take an existing part and then, you know, evaluate it for AM, and they find out that it ends up being a little bit too expensive. Some companies stop there, call it AM too expensive, and then move on. Other companies start to say, okay, well, maybe that isn't the right approach. Let's do some part consolidation and then do that components, compare that pricing versus many different assembled together, and then they see, okay, there's a little bit of value there. And then eventually companies kind of mature and then realize that, okay, now optimized part. And this is what you see a lot of the examples, topology optimized parts, the really organic looking structure. Then they start to sort of realize we should design with AM in mind to really take advantage of the design optimization. So they do. Like I said, you've seen examples of this for a number of years. And then the AM Nirvana piece is sort of the next level. I had the great opportunity to reside at Oak Ridge National Laboratory a few years back before joining Honeywell at the MDF. And, you know, the folks there do a tremendous job with science and materials manufacturing. So what AM Nirvana is really sort of a merging of all the advanced material science work that's happening in the field, merging with the design optimization, like in the organic structure, to really sort of one day really optimize more than microstructural materials and structures to be more efficient, and then map that to the actual design itself. So then you take it even to the next level of optimization. So that's what AM Nirvana is, a combination of materials such as new alloy development, such as microstructure manipulation, you know, functionally gradient materials, and sort of combining all of the developments with AM, the design optimization elements to create kind of a next level of optimization. And I think we'll see that in a few years, honestly. And so that's what AM Nirvana is, and that's how we arrive. So I think it's more of a future state, you know, where is this going to go? And you know, it's obviously going to take software development and a lot of time. And you already see some of the design software starting to gravitate to that. We're starting to map materials information into not as scale files, but into digital definition, and combine that with topology optimization. So it's going to come in a number of years, but I think you're going to ultimately see this.
So Beth, because you're focused on change management side, what is your perspective on leapfrogging when an organization adopts additive manufacturing? Is this the natural path of adopting AM to get buy-in internally? Or is it better to jump across to design with AM from the start? How do you get an entire organization galvanized towards these efforts?
You know, that's an excellent question. I think, you know, it's interesting. So from our perspective as well, so Dave is the one that's on the front line that has a wealth of information and experience, honestly, from the additive manufacturing. And I think what he's done was he really led the development in terms of the figure that we just went through and talking about the change from those perspectives. But it's something that, you know, oddly enough, this is a type of new manufacturing that people still, and organizations in general, just kind of struggle with, from how they're going to go after and attack this new methodology and bring it within their company. Oftentimes it's management. I think Dave will talk about this a little bit more when we, you know, and talk about some of the war stories that he's witnessed. But from a new technology perspective, many organizations go, okay, this is just a great, cool new thing. Everything should work this way, right? We should be making every part using additive manufacturing. We're not looking at it from any sort of new perspective of bringing in new technology, which we would with anything else that we're doing. So as Dave mentioned, I spent 10 years in industry before going to academia. We would bring in new methodologies and new tooling, and we would take the time to train people and make sure that we started with kind of some small steps, kind of the baby steps of understanding how the technology works. And we would go through that path, where most organizations seem to want to just jump in, you know, head first and dive into additive manufacturing as our new methodology, and we're going to do everything this way, without really taking a step back and understanding what is the culture of your organization internally. Are we prepared to do something like this? What are the training programs that we're setting up to make sure that we're going to be successful? You know, where are those small teams? So that we can make sure that we get the right individuals with the right knowledge and the right training that can take charge and really kind of run with this by partnering with upper management. And that's where kind of the change management's been so different with additive manufacturing versus other different types of you know, new changes that have happened within just manufacturing in general.
And one thing you mentioned in the book specifically is the fact that additive manufacturing is so cross-functional. You can't just introduce additive manufacturing and expect procurement to handle one thing, R&D to handle another effort from AM, and then everyone starts fighting for resources. And that is difficult to really empower additive manufacturing efforts at an organization. Which brings me to this wonderful chart that you guys have created within your textbook. Since you did mention, Beth, that Dave is part of the front line, I was wondering, Dave, if you could share some of your war stories that are worth mentioning that everyone should take home, at least the top 3, so that we all know what not to do.
Well, yeah, I will say that my colleague, the co-author, I mean, I didn't create all of these war stories. Mike Kenworthy also provided an enormous amount of information for these. But mainly they're just stories that talk about, you know, our experiences. And, you know, Mike and I have worked at a number of large aerospace specific companies that, you know, have, you know, brute forced their way through a lot of AM struggles culturally as well as technical adoption. So I feel like we've had quite a few experiences that perhaps maybe others haven't. So that's why we felt compelled to offer these war stories. But we did have a lot of fun writing them, honestly, and especially titling them, because I think that was part of the entertainment. You know, these stories sort of just wrote themselves, honestly, from our experiences. They didn't really quite, we didn't have to really think a lot about it. Hey, these are details. But yeah, we've, as you can see here, we have different titles of these stories. You know, we have, let's say we have Big Data Boondoggle, we have Painting for Gold in Kansas, we have all of these sort of things that sort of typify the struggles that we've had. So I don't know if I have favorites, honestly, because we've lived through all of these. But I don't know, I could just take a few of them. Some of them that we see a lot in terms of different companies, not just the ones that we worked at, but with, you know, suppliers or customers, have been, you know, around sort of the crab mentality one that we talk about. So crab mentality, psychological term about, sort of groups always wanting to pull down anyone who's trying to escape the bucket. That's the whole idea of a bunch of crabs in a bucket. If anyone sort of tries to escape the bucket, the crabs kind of pull down the crabs trying to escape the bucket. So we've seen this typified for additive manufacturing as you try to push forward AM initiatives and you show a lot of gain. The rest of the organization kind of comes in and says, no, this isn't ready yet, even though they've had nothing to do with the project. And they sort of, try to pull down the people advancing it and cast doubt, which is much easier to do. It's change management is very hard, very, very, very hard. And, there's a lot of crabs in the bottom that constantly pull you down. Story that we've seen very, very common.
And how do you deal with that jealousy, internal infighting, or
it's not always jealousy. I mean, I think we list in the book many different. A lot of it is just change in general that people feel uncomfortable with. Some of it is jealousy, yeah, but some of it is also the fact that you're doing something new and different, and people have made a living and gotten a paycheck by doing it the old way for many years, and so they see that as an existential threat to their livelihood, maybe in some strange way. So I think that there are different reasons for it, and we detail a lot of that in the book. But it's something it's change management from a cultural standpoint, and so that's one of the reasons why we wanted to come up with this book, and a big reason why Beth's been involved in this book as well is the fact that this is all change management, and this isn't the first time that companies have ever had to go through change management, right? We've had Six Sigma and Lean, technologies implemented and tools implemented into manufacturing for decades, and they all went through the same sort of learning. And so the reason for applying a lot of the Lean and Six Sigma tools to additive manufacturing is because this stuff has already been researched and has been implemented successfully, and we're trying to use the lessons learned from those fields and apply it to AM. So that's why the whole back half detailing Lean and Six Sigma challenges and methods and the changes and impediments.
Beth, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
No, I think that's exactly it. To me, it's such an interesting animal in terms of additive manufacturing because of that. As Dave mentioned, from the Lean and Six Sigma perspective, that's where a lot of my background is. Companies are prepared to roll out training. They expect that. And they also set up career ladders and career paths along that line to make sure that people have the training, have the expertise, and you start with smaller training projects and very focused areas where really, I probably could easily argue that implementing and then additive manufacturing within a company is probably much more expensive than Six Sigma. Yet we're not, a lot of organizations are not prepared or even thinking about what type of investment they need in terms of the training, in terms of the messages that they're sending, in terms of how they're setting up steering committees to make sure that it's a successful rollout and implementation.
Definitely. I think later on in this talk, in this fireside chat, we can discuss what we could do to overcome some of these challenges. But before we do that, we do have a question from the community, from Duncan Williams Gibbons, who said, when adding an additive manufacturing production line, how is training of operators addressed in the aerospace industry? And are machine OEMs consulted? Also, are operators retrained on AM-specific non-conformance and FODs?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it's been my experience that there is training, obviously, for the operators of the equipment. If I think by production facility, you mean an AM production facility in-house, you're really building product and then machining it, and then heat treating it and going through all the steps. So yes, the machine manufacturers train the technicians running the machines, and the manufacturing is involved in that whole process. That training is then sort of distributed to other technicians that may not have received that training. Maybe if you have a bunch of different types of machines all running in production, certain manufacturing technicians trained in and vice versa, and you want them to all be sort of cross-pollinated across all the AM machines. So yeah, that's sort of how it works right now. Is that the best solution? Probably not, but that's where we are. I would love to see, I think I've seen some initiatives at the community college and technical college level where they're starting to create certification programs around some of the machines and the technologies. I think that's a tremendous, great step in terms of creating an industrial base to run these machines, because right now most people get their training by working in industry and running the machines themselves, and they're receiving that training from companies. Does that answer that question?
I believe so. If not, feel free to ask away here. Yes, and so with regards to training, how do you develop a training program not only for what you call the frontline engineers, frontline folks like the application engineers, technicians, and tough to hire experts, to training your managerial level to manage the operations to your management level? You mentioned in one of the war stories, Innovate Now, there's so many organizations that hear, oh, competitor X bought this machine and is now starting an R&D center. What do I do? And some people hire.
That's right, yeah. And also in that war story, we talk about that, there's traditionally brainstorming groups, right? And this is how history has attacked things for decades and decades. So again, I'm not making light of the approach. It's just that this has always been the case. We see that, okay, we need more AM parts, and we know they can't look like our existing ones. Okay, we know that. So let's create a whole brainstorming session where we get a whole bunch of people at AM, get them in a room, and then we say, now in the next 8 hours, I want you to define what an AM part should look like for our product line. And then we say, go. And then after 8 hours, you're going to come up with a great thing that we're going to build. Well, but that's not going to work, right? That's the approach that I've seen happen. And that's why that chapter is titled Innovate Now. What I've seen as a better approach in training is just, conference attendance. And in light of the current situation that we're in, that can be quite difficult, but the face-to-face conference attendance, understanding the actual technologies and asking the people who actually are embedded with the technologies, who sell the machines, who are working on the machines, and then, working with other colleagues from maybe other companies, talking about, back of the napkin kind of ideas, actually have technology experience. Great way to kind of come up with new ideas. Another thing in terms of training, within large companies, a lot of them have implemented internal training for AM, where they go through their internal product, sort of case studies on how to approach this type of product line with AM design thinking. You have to have experts within the company to help manage that. If you don't, there's always consultants out there that can come in and bridge that. The Barnes Group, for example, is one that they've actually partnered with Purdue Online and have a whole sort of get familiarity with different. You don't always have to have an expert. There are consultants out there that provide that information and can help lead those sort of AM education initiatives.
Definitely. And I think that brings us to Mike's question, to manage all this, like, what is the biggest risk that companies face when they adopt additive? And what is the biggest risk that companies face when not adopting additive?
Well, sorry, was Beth speaking? Or was it?
Oh, that was my calendar.
Oh, okay. It's just like,
sorry about that.
So the question was, what are the largest impediments, and what are the what was it? Largest impediment for adoption?
What is the biggest risk that companies face, and what's the biggest risk companies face by not adopting?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Some of the biggest risks that companies face, I would say, strategy on how they experience. You have companies on pendulum who want to just buy a bunch of machines and say, okay, now let's go how with these machines. So they'll drop an enormous amount of capital on that, and then you'll get a lot of, and within 3 years, a new machine that's better, and you've just now written all of your products and application documents and action of a certain with that specific machine, and now there's a new machine out years later that's far superior to your old machine from a different company, and then now what do? Do you now have to go kickstart and restart that entire application process again, and test, talking somewhere $500, $3 million in testing to just develop that certification for a different type of machine. So that's one of the basics, is just sinking so hard into one type of AM technology. I think that's looking at a lot of types of machines that can, where you can write a spec on one, and then put the risk more on the service bureau to sort of upgrade to the next machine down the road. There's also companies who look more at buying the equipment, maybe leasing, and then getting upgrades in the future. So that's one of the big risks, is just simply sort of the strategy, and then how do you sort of attack it from a make versus buy. So not really understanding the cultural dynamics involved, and that's a big reason why we wrote this book, is that this is a very large change management effort, and you have to have executive buy-in from the top down all the time. If it's constantly a grassroots movement where people at the lower level to pull up through the organization, and you don't have that executive buy-in, it's going to be very, very difficult. So you have to have that executive buy-in. So I think there's a number of risks associated with trying to implement it.
Yeah.
I'll let Beth jump in as well.
Oh, well, I was going to jump in for a second and say, I think this is where, when we wrote the sections on the war stories, we were really trying to talk about like a lot of the risks that Dave saw in industry, and Mike as well too, because there are some key risks. I mean, not to jump back to the war stories, but the one just in terms of what Dave was just talking about, really ties nicely in terms of what we call it, suckers for sunk costs.
Yes.
Right.
We'll spend a lot of money. And don't really have a plan. Like that whole strategy aspect really linked to all of the war stories that people just jump in and feet first and go, this is our way forward, without really having that strategy.
Speaking of strategy, here we have Alquist Borneados from Fruity Hub saying, do smaller, more agile organizations and startups have an advantage when it comes to AM product innovation? And also, one thing you noted in your book was how there could be leverage between large enterprises and startups to really collaborate together.
A good point. Typically, just all organizational behavior theory for the past 50, 100 years, we'll say yes, the smaller companies advantage. And I think that is very true here with this technology, because they can run in a more agile environment. They can design and innovate in a more agile way, where you do these design sprints using, VPD sort of approaches. That's very typical. They definitely have sort of advantage of moving quickly, but then they're also constrained in the fact that they may not have the resources to then expand and grow initially, right? So then they're going to fight for. So I think that there could be good, large business, small business partnership, and I think you see a lot of times actually. You see not only partnership, acquisitions and mergers throughout the industry happening, and especially on the software side. where, you'll see a larger software company, sort of got a smaller software company, and or you see the partnership approach too. I think both are very effective, and I think it definitely has its place in this.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of roles, Hector Luna Ramirez is asking, what different roles do you see additive manufacturing having depending on the size of the company and has its influence on rapid prototyping?
Can you repeat that? I was having some mic difficulty.
Yeah. What different roles do you see AM having depending on the size of a company as it relates to rapid prototyping?
Okay, good. Yeah, so I guess from my perspective, the size of the company, if you just have perhaps a very small company, a whole team of experts of AM people in a small, that's not super. You have to have kind of, a so to speak, or somebody who at least knows about the technology in a small company. And then you can also reach out, as I mentioned, there's consultants and things in industry. But from a prototyping standpoint, I think as large business should be using AM technology for prototyping, regardless of the size of the business. I mean, if you're talking about doing new products, right? There's service bureaus all over the place that can provide design, fit, and function prototypes. That's been around for decades now. So I think both small business and large business should be using that. A lot of the large businesses have their own sort of rapid prototyping departments and groups within their company that constantly spit out polymer parts, as well as some basic metal parts for prototyping as well. So I don't think that should change in terms of the company size. The approach, the smaller companies may not have the resources, so maybe they have to, from a strategy standpoint, they may have to look out of house.
Definitely. I have one question that I've been dying to ask is, okay, so an organization, they have finally gotten budget, right? And it takes forever to build a business case, especially in an enterprise, and get buy-in from folks. They have a budget to do a part-for-part change, but then they realize after listening to your wonderful talk today, doing part-for-part change is not a good idea. We should actually start back and design for additive manufacturing. One thing you mentioned in your book is, well, now folks are locked in. Do I switch my approach, but then I might lose my budget because it requires more funding, and the initial investment will cover future costs, or should I continue as is? What is the best way for an organization that's kind of in that middle area for them to maximize their efforts and not waste their time?
One of the things that I think, if they're sort of stuck in that middle zone, right, where they've got the budget, but maybe they haven't picked the right projects, is to kind of go through, we have a whole process flow that's listed in the book on how to select sort of the right projects, and go through the process of looking at how to do systems integration, and then maybe just pick a case pick a full case study where you can maybe do some rapid prototyping very quickly of a design thought, and then show that to the people who provided you the budget, saying, okay, look, we're going to pivot and take this sort of strategy now. We see a bigger cost play if we take this sort of strategy, look at this part, have them actually touch it, say, okay, this is a design concept that we much more optimization out of for this particular design. And we feel like we can go to market with this, and we can expand this product like our competitors. And then I think by having sort of something tactile that you can show and let them hold, okay, this is case one. Now, if we run through this and it's successful, then let us take the budget and expand to case two, case three, sort of thing. So best way to do it is sort of, not say that all this money back and then hope that, you get it a different way. But I would say just take that, repurpose it, and pivot to a strategy where you can simply do a low-hanging fruit case study to show, okay, this is now our approach. We're not going to go look at thousands of part numbers. We're now going to look at systems integration approach this way.
That's very insightful. Thank you. Beth, do you want to add anything else? We're pretty much time's up, but just wanted to give you the last word. This has been super fun, and I'm sure everyone in the audience really enjoyed it as well. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, David. Thank you, Beth, for your wonderful insights. I'm sure that over 280 people that tuned in found it very useful. There will be a recording of this later on, and we thank you for your time. And hopefully we can do this again.
All right, very good. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah. Have a great day.
Bye. Next up is Yukingao and Suno.